Welcome to another Wellness Wednesday. Let's get right into it. Here we go. Good. So there we go. So today on our series of parenting and mental health, we're going to go over empowering parents to lead change. Specifically, October was National Bully Prevention Month. And so today we're going to talk about preventing bullying. And this conversation is about building positive, safe, mentally strong, athletic environments where all kids thrive. Most people don't think about the sports field as a place where bullying happens, right? We usually think about it happening at school or maybe on the internet. We don't necessarily think about it on the sports field, but it does happen and it happens quite frequently. So today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that and excuse me, and discussing ways that you can create safer environments. So there is some of the information about this is related to a book that's called Read This Book Tonight to Help You Win Tomorrow. Uh, and Dr. Gilbert, who is a known sports psychologist and academic, and he reminds us that self-talk is the invisible coach that is in every athlete's head. And, going beyond sports, self-talk is the invisible life coach for all of us. It is always in our head, always talking to us, and oftentimes our worst critic. So we want to you help your children build a champion's inner voice. So bullying can take many forms on teams. We already know, we've talked about and I've done sessions on how bullying can show up in a school setting. We see bullying at home unfortunately, from parents. We also see it from siblings or other relatives. It can come up in the form of teasing. Teasing, though, if it's repeated and severe, can actually cause harm and can create an environment that is pretty toxic. Sports are supposed to be a place where safe learning can happen and not supposed to be a place where people feel fear. Bullying, of course, can be in the form of verbal words, right? It can be social, including or excluding kids. It can also be physical, right? Kids can use sports as a way to push somebody over or things like that, where they use the sport as the excuse to have that physical contact, when really they're using it as a form of intimidation. So, what do you want to look out for? Well, these signs might be really subtle, but they're often signals or red flags of deeper issues. You want to stay engaged in your child's experience. Silence doesn't always mean things are fine. And especially when kids say everything's fine or okay or good, dig deeper. So if you notice that your child is avoiding practices or games, even, and starts to become a regular occurrence. If you notice changes in their regular behavior, right? They're sleeping less or more. they're eating less or more, they're more moody than they usually are. Assuming that these aren't caused by other things, right? You always have to rule out being sick, going through puberty, right? Just a lot of other changes. You want to rule that stuff out. But if it doesn't seem to be accounted for anything else and they're still having all these changes, you might want to pay more attention. And this can get a little tricky. Um, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But sudden loss or interest in the sport, especially if your child really, really was loving the sport, they were loving doing it, and all of a sudden now they don't want to touch a ball or step onto a court or walk into a gym, then you might want to dig a little bit deeper as to why. If your children suddenly have a bunch of injuries that are keeping them from going to practice or keeps them on the bench and away from other team members, especially if these injuries don't seem to have any medical reasoning. Um, well, maybe not especially. If they suddenly have injuries that the doctors say, oh, I can't really find anything wrong, just ice it, or they start getting a lot of real injuries and they seem to be frequent and persistent. Either way, you want to start paying attention. Um, this is really tricky because kids naturally get hurt in sports. So that's a little different than going to school. Yes, every once in a while, if there's still recess, kids can skin a knee or fall down and get some bruises. But in sports, a lot of sports, even though they're not supposed to be contact, there is contact, and that's normal and part of the sport. So, think about the way, puppies or, young animals play with each other. They're rumbling and they're tumbling and they're rolling on each other and batting at each other. I mean, that's animal play, and sports, youth sports especially, is a version of that. So sports don't exist without injury. Of course, we don't want our kids to get injured, but it's going to happen. The first time my son had sore muscles, I laughed and actually smiled, and he thought I was nuts because I was like, "Oh my gosh, you have sore muscles for the first time." And then realizing when my kids were limping very severely, and I realized it was a bruise, right? They had never experienced what a bruise was before. So, sometimes it's going to seem severe because your kids have never experienced it before. Um, and sometimes they'll be fine and there's not much they need to do. And we use a term that I learned from someone else. I can't take credit for this, but I would often ask my kids, are you hurt or are you injured? And hurt just means there's a little bit of pain, but you're gonna be fine. That's more likely a bruise, right? A superficial bruise. Injured means I need to take you to the doctor or the hospital. So making that differentiation for kids, especially when trying to dig deeper, looking for other warning signs of other things going on, that can be helpful. So let's keep talking. In terms of shifting a culture, and anyone in business or that works with organizational change or societal change, they'll say that language matters. Calling a child a bully can make the behavior feel permanent. Calling out the behavior leaves room for accountability and growth. And oftentimes, calling a kid a bully, I have a new 13-year-old, and I was asking his group of friends the other night when they were over, who was the most annoying kid in their class, and then it was interesting how they came up with answers. Sometimes the kids were annoying for reasons that those kids couldn't help. And you could hear them kind of say, oh, well, they're just annoying because they have to deal with this or because of this, or they're just immature. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll ask the difference. Who's the meanest kid in your grade? And then they all came to a very, interestingly enough, a very unified answer. And it was interesting to talk to the kids about this, what they thought made this kid quote unquote mean. Notice I never used the word bully, right? And both my kids have had minor bullying incidents. And in those cases, I've been able to talk with my kids through it because I actually, in both cases, knew the other kid. So I could help see multiple sides or multiple perspectives. Um, so, sometimes labeling the kid a bully keeps them in that category, and the kid that is the quote unquote bully will feel like that's part of their identity. We don't want that, right? What you want to say is maybe you're acting like a bully, which might give the child pause if they care about that, right? They may be like, oh, I'm not trying to be a bully, right? Just having a bad day or a bad month. Maybe their parents are going through a divorce or someone they cared about has passed away recently, right? There might be lots of other circumstances we don't know about. Um, so instead of trying to label a kid, think about just talk about the behavior, right? You're acting like a bully, and then you might want to ask, what do you think bullies act like? And talk through it with the whole team. I saw something really successfully done with my son's soccer team by their coach, talking about how teams support each other. And the coach laid down on the ground and said, pick me up. And he asked one particular person to pick him up. And of course, the kid couldn't do it. And then he's like, okay. And then he kept asking more and more kids to try and pick him up. And eventually, when they had the whole team, they could pick their coach up. And so then they talked about that and talked about how working together, there were a lot of team lessons in that. And what he looped it back to was supporting each other versus trying to tear each other down and being together in unified fronts, even when things felt difficult, which is part of why we love sports, right? It allows our kids to experience adversity in kind of a safe environment. So we want to keep that environment safe. So again, focus on the behavior, not the label. We also want to pay attention to things online. This can be tricky. Lots of parents have different opinions about the level of privacy their kids should have. Um, I am of the mindset of, well, when you get in the professional world, there is no perceived privacy on the laptop, the work laptop or the work computer you're using. So getting my kids used to that lack of perceived privacy isn't such a bad thing. It doesn't mean I go through their phones or laptops every day. It's just I have that. I had my kids sign a contract with the devices they use, and they know that I have the right to go on there if I feel like I have a need to. So I guess not unlike getting a warrant for, searching someone's home. I kind of have that written into the contract my kids sign. Um, but and related to this, digital bullying is a real thing and can be very, very dangerous. In fact, and I read this percentage and I think it's low. I'm not sure. I feel like there's a lack of reporting out there, but they say 22% of bullied kids report online or text-based bullying. I feel like it's more. And, maybe it's because it's not always reported and it's tougher to find, right? A kid gets yelled at or teased on the playground or on a sports field, everyone else sees it. When it's cyberbullying, it's not always seen by everyone. Although on social media, a lot of times they will, and it'll be what we would consider to be passive aggressive bullying, right? Where they might um, post pictures of kids that the kids don't want posted, or they might make comments that the other kid understands. There's lots of ways it can happen. But every once in a while, sitting down and looking at social media with your kid and kind of saying, hey, what do you think of this? Or what does this post mean by your friend? You can even start by looking at your social media with your kids and helping them understand, oh, well, my friend posted this because they want to celebrate, this achievement or whatever. But going through and then talking and asking about, well, did this post feel good to you or bad to you? Or what do you make of that? Or, do you think this could have been done more nicely? That active and open conversation about it can really help your kids make sense and report better when they feel like they're being bullied online. So it's not easy for kids to tell us what's happening. And we need to create conditions where the kids feel safe. And part of that is they need to feel safe, heard, and supported. Okay. So I love and don't love this picture all in the same. This is very stereotypical. However, um, it, it, it fits what we're talking about. I have worked with kids and I have also worked with adults dealing with aspects of their childhood where they had a coach or a parent that was bullying them. And yes, there might be moments where you yell at a kid on a field. And I'm also just, full disclosure, I also do a lot of youth coaching. I have coached 3-year-olds all the way up to 30-year-olds on sports fields. So I've done a lot of coaching in my days. I've coached colleges, high schools, all of, everything you can think of, truly. Co-ed teams, same-sex teams, men and women, girls and boys. And there are different ways and techniques you have to approach. If really, I, if you're a good coach, you change your coaching method to fit the kid because sometimes different kids need different incentives. For some kids, they do need a little yelling. I have one girl on one of my teams where the parents are both military, and they told me they're like, look, sometimes my daughter needs you to yell at her for her to snap into it, and so sometimes I will yell at her and then tell her what to do. Um, it is a rare time where I use that, but sometimes it works. Now, do I make an environment of fear? Absolutely not. Does that mean that teams don't get punished sometimes when, they're goofing off or my daughter does gymnastics and the coaches had to talk to them about not paying attention and how dangerous that is when they're practicing for gymnastics because not paying attention can cause injuries very quickly, right? That is a sport where you have to be hyper focused. Uh, so yeah, fear. And kids might not tell us about what's going on because they're afraid that by telling the coaches, they might be singled out or that the coaches might make it worse, right? They might be singled out by the coach or the coach might use their name. Um, they might feel shame or embarrassment that they weren't able to handle it themselves because on the sports field, kids do get a level of autonomy, right? They're allowed to make decisions on the field or on the court or in the gym uh, that is separate from their coach because we can't move their bodies and do things for them while they're playing the game. Um, there's also sometimes, and we don't always think about this, kids might not tell us because they don't think anyone's going to do anything. So it comes down to like, I don't care or whatever because no one's going to do anything about it. Part of creating a safe environment, and this is whether you're in the corporate sector, in your home, or on a sports field, letting kids know that those that are in charge, those that are responsible for the safety of those around them, if they find out about something that's unsafe, that they take action. And you have to be really consistent about this. It doesn't mean punishing, it means taking action. So if, you know, kids are not listening and it's creating a dangerous environment, I have definitely said before I have had my kids sit up and do sprints until they've decided they want to listen, right? That's the punishing side. Or sometimes I know there are kids that really like incentive. If we get done early, a lot of times kids want to scrimmage or there are fun, drills that they really like doing. If they get this certain drill done and we master it to some level, then we can do that at the end of practice, right? So depending on the age, depending on the kids that you're working with, different techniques work. And make sure that you're consistently taking action when action is needed. What you don't want to do is likely call the kids out that are being bullied or that are bullying. You don't want to call them out in public. Maybe talk to them privately, find out what's going on. Because again, I'm using the label bully, but a lot of times those kids might just be going through something at home. And my own personal experience with what I experienced with my kids, one of the kids that was being kind of mean to one of my children was going through a really nasty divorce. And they didn't have anyone to talk to. And they were probably just getting their aggression out and, projecting all their anger that they couldn't, put onto their parents because they get in trouble onto their peers, their teammates. And it wasn't fair. Um, so, had I been that kid's coach, I might have pulled them aside and said, hey, like, you're not being very nice to your teammates. What's going on? And having that genuine concern can really help kids that are struggling feel better. You can also talk to the kid that feels like they're being bullied, what they can do differently and how they can approach it. I've talked to lots of kids about this. The first step is to tell the other person, hey, I don't like that. Like what you're doing doesn't feel good. It's rude. It hurts. It's any number of whatever the words are, right? Help them find the words. And then the second step is to go tell someone in charge, right? So letting them know the steps, letting them have the vocabulary, letting them know you're going to listen without judgment, which is really important, right? Not using words like stupid or, labeling them as a bully or mean, right? Just saying like who acts mean or who's acting, there are very subtle differences can make a big difference. Okay. So as a parent, if your kid brings this concern to you, you want to resist the urge to act immediately. A lot of parents do this and they think, And I get it. You worry for your kid. You want to help them. You don't want them to experience this pain. Well, so you want to first just listen. And again, without judgment, just listen, hear what they have to say, ask clarifying questions, right? Which are usually open-ended questions like, how did it feel to you when that person said that to you or did that to you? Or what happened prior to that? That question's a little tricky. Make sure you don't ask that with giving the perceive or the perception that maybe you think your kid did something to provoke the bad behavior. You want to be really careful with that, but sometimes it's good to just know what happened right before or right after this event. Um, then you can also ask open-ended questions that help bring your kid into the problem solving. You can say, well, what would feel helpful? What would you like me to do in this situation? What would or what would you like an adult to do? Or what would be the outcome that you'd like to see, right? Asking those things can be really powerful. Uh, you know, sometimes your kids will say, I just wanted you to know I'm going to do this. I've got it. Okay. Or if they just say, I've got it, say, okay, well, you brought it to me for a reason. So what's your plan? Ask them, but be curious. That can really help your kid kind of think through it. Sometimes they might just say, oh, I'm going to go and tell them who's boss tomorrow, right? Okay. I had one instance where I had one of my kids stand up to someone that was bullying another teammate. And of course, I got a call from the coach saying that, my kid yelled at another kid and pushed him off of the teammate, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so I did ask my kid about it that night and said, hey, I heard there was some drama during practice. What happened? Right? Didn't say he was involved with it, didn't talk about the people involved or how I heard. I just said, I heard there was some drama and gave my kid a chance to just kind of tell their own story. Then sometimes I add stuff in and say, oh, well, it was coach that reached out to me and this is what I heard, but give them a chance to tell their version because there's always multiple sides to a story. Okay. So part of that, right? We ask them what happened. We ask them what they can do differently. We want to give them tools that help them to change the situation, right? There are many safe ways for kids to intervene, and it's not about heroics. It's about being compassionate, being present in the moment, and having steps, right? I always talk to kids about, things like first responders and SWAT teams, right? They are in very stressful environments that most of us would just curl up in a ball and just start crying, right? Or run away. And they do very brave things in the face of danger. Why? Because they have practiced how to respond to dangerous situations over and over and over again. Being bullied is dangerous to kids. It feels unsafe, right? So what should we do? Practice behaviors that can help them regain safety. So what can that look like? Again, I started to talk about it earlier where I've worked with kids in my office about uh, first telling the person being mean or bullying, I don't like what you're doing. Stop, right? Give them some sort of signal that this is not okay, right? Usually with words first, right? Because as we see in sports, if we watch professional sports, someone will egg someone on and then maybe they'll do something and then the person pushes back and the person that pushes back gets the penalty, right? You see it a lot. Um, it's all part of the game, right? Well, so you want to make sure your child expresses their discomfort, their feeling hurt or unsafe out loud. Now, some kids might be very afraid of doing that because, oh, I don't want to look like I'm a wimp or something like that, right? Yeah, well, you know what's really wimpy? Not saying something and letting that person do it to other people on the team. So you've got to be brave enough to say, hey, this doesn't feel good so that it doesn't happen to other people. So, telling them to then get help from a trusted adult, a coach, if the coach doesn't feel like someone they can trust, you got to talk about that, right? And you got to really think twice about whether or not that kid goes back to that team if the adult. And I've had kids in my office before that have talked about how mean their coach is and how much they get yelled at. I had one kid that had post-traumatic stress disorder, and the coach was made aware of it, and still the coach would yell and scream and push this kid. And eventually the kid had to quit the sport, which is unfortunate because they were a very talented athlete. But the coach just, and what bothered me was that the organization did not take ownership of that. So unfortunately, we haven't situations like that. But, first we've got to give people an opportunity to step up, right? By letting them know. So finding an adult, speaking your words out loud, uh, then allowing the kid to talk to someone privately about how it feels, what they can do. You can also talk to your child about the, methods of ignoring the bully. If you think they're doing it just to get attention, just walking away, right? For younger kids, this is often what they need to do. They just need to walk away, go to a safe place, a safe, space. If your kid watches someone else being bullied, maybe redirecting the situation by talking about something that everybody likes. The classic redirection is like, oh, you know, how about those? And name your professional sports team in the area, right? Um, and just helping them talk through it and find ways to deal with it safely. So part of this is setting the tone at home. So if you see siblings bullying each other, call it out immediately, walk them through it, talk about ways that they can safely, you know, voice their frustration or talk about how they feel. Be very clear about the boundaries at home so that your kids can practice it at home under your watchful eye. So when they go to a sports practice, you can, know that your kid will know how to handle it. It's also okay to, when your kid joins a team with a coach that maybe you don't know, to ask the coach the first day of practice. A lot of coaches offer the ability to, ask questions on the first day of practice, or they have a parent meeting early on. Also, teachers do this at the beginning of the school year. A question can be, how do you handle bullying? They might not have an answer, but it will definitely put them on the spot of like, okay, I need to pay attention to this. Um, So part of setting boundaries is defining what is tolerated, what isn't, and what the consequences are for not following the rules, right? If you don't set consequences, they don't know, right? This goes to screen time or anything else in the house, right? It's a very, uh, it's a very weak threat when you say, "Oh, if you don't get off the screen now, if you don't stop yelling at your brother, I'm going to do X," and you never do X. Okay, I'm going to take away your tablet or your screen if you keep bullying your brother. And then you don't take it away because you don't want to have to, entertain that kid for the next 2 hours. You really have to find consequences are that are something that the kid will take seriously, but also something you feel like you can enforce. You also want to talk about ways to calm down for both at home, the person that's upset, and this might happen with adults, right? So if your partner comes home and they start using bullying behaviors, right? They yell at someone, they throw something down, and be like, hey, 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 hey. You don't have to say you're being a bully. You can just say, you're acting like a bully right now, right? And of course you would have had this conversation long before this happens, but you want to help kids identify that bullying behavior so that you can say like, hey, it looks like you need a minute alone. And you encourage you and the kids to walk away and allow the person to calm down. So there are lots of different ways to set the boundaries. You can talk to your school counselor about this. You can also find resources about this, which I show at the end. But there are ways to set boundaries, but boundaries have to be clear and they have to be specific to be able to work. So why am I talking about this? If there's a bullying problem in sports, why do we have our kids play sports? Well, if you've listened to any of my talks before, you know that I feel very strongly about sports in our culture and how they can have such a positive influence. You know, sports, sport isn't just a place where bullying happens. It's also one of the richest environments for kids to be able to build confidence, self-regulation, and a sense of community, right? kids get a chance to deal and they build resilience and grit. They learn how to deal with adversity. They learn how to deal with kids that are different than them, have different strengths and weaknesses than them, and how to learn how to put that all together. Those types of skills are something that's going to serve them throughout life if they learn them well. And the social emotional learning that happens early can be so powerful. So there's so much positive that comes from sports that if we want to make sure we're keeping this environment safe for our kids so that they can benefit from it, not to mention all the physical health benefits, right? The movement, um, just getting out and raising your heart rate for a little bit. We know how important exercise is to our physical health. I know how much important getting outside is important to mental health. I tell my clients and patients that all the time. So sports have a lot of really positive that way outweigh the negative. So we have to find a way to make sure we keep it a safe environment. So what's part of that? Well, I talked about Dr. Gibler at the beginning, and he's in his book. Um, Part of that is mental performance, and that's something you can do at home. You might not be able to teach your kids specific sports skills, but you can work on their mental strength. And where that starts, and this is another great question you can ask your coach at the beginning of the season, what's what is their strategy or their perception or their vision or their mantra around winning, right? So I threw a lot of different words out there, but basically, if the coach's only objective is winning, you're going to develop kids with fixed mindset. They will be very black and white, and they will really struggle with dealing with adversity, and they won't learn from situations where they do get a defeat or they do make a mistake. Um, Winning is built in your mind before it shows up on the scoreboard. And so you have to redefine winning as not something that is a goal to achieve, but is merely an outcome of doing all the right things. So, winning isn't just about getting trophies or coming in first place. It's about mental strength. It's about focus. It's about grit and resilience. It's about getting upset, but being able to channel that emotion into something positive. It's about effort over outcome. I have talked about that a lot in my coaching days, and you have to be consistent that you believe in that. Uh, some of the best coaches I've ever had don't focus on whether we won or lost. They focus on the skills that we improved upon. Yes, there is a certain point in time where winning and losing matters. If you're a professional athlete, winning and losing matters. But even at that level, when you talk to the players, the winning is still a byproduct of all the other time they put in to get prepared for that moment, right? Um, the nice thing about sports is if you lose, it's not life or death. There are a lot of other professions where if you lose, it is life or death. So sports are a really good opportunity to lose, understand how to learn from that mistake and do better next time so that you are better prepared. So that when you get into environments where, losing, so to speak, is a much more severe consequence, you know how to handle adversity. So, how do you build mental strength? And this comes from the American Association of Sports Psychology. That's what those initials up there are the acronym. So here's kind of the strategy and what you can do. Parents are mental coaches, whether you want to be or not. And if you use these 5 habits, these just changing your language a little bit, you can really start to build resilience in your kid on the sports field and everywhere else. This comes straight out of Dr. Gilbert's book. And it reminds us again, back to the self-talk, that self-talk really is the invisible coach that is inside of everyone's head. So, how can we do that? Well, the strategy is to praise effort, not outcome. Effort, right? I'm proud of how hard you worked today. This is if they win or if they lose. If they worked hard. If they didn't work hard, you can say, hey, I noticed you were walking a lot out there, or I noticed you were putting your head down and you asked to come out when usually you can run for hours. Or I noticed you walked on the sports field, but then as soon as the game ended, you ran and sprinted around on the playground. Again, did you notice I was just pointing out observations? I wasn't saying you were playing really lazy. That's a label. Stay away from that, right? I do this as a coach. If I see a kid walking and they know this, I tell them, if you're walking, I'm going to pull you out because I assume you're tired, right? So I let them know the boundaries, right? So if the kid's walking, I'll pull them off. And if this is a kid that's normally like always running, right? Because there are different kids at different physical capacities, I'll pull them off and say, hey, you're walking a little bit low than normal, or you seem a little sluggish. Is everything okay? Almost every single time I will get a response that makes sense. Like, oh, coach, I'm really sorry. I had a swim meet this morning and I'm exhausted. Or, yeah, I had the flu all week and I am just barely feeling better, right? They're really obvious things. I'm like, oh, okay, well, great. I'll let you sit and rest and I'll let some other kids get some playing time that don't have the flu, right? Or didn't, compete in something else this morning. The kid understands that and they appreciate it as opposed to pulling them off and being like, you're getting really lazy. Go sit on the bench. Very different response. So as parents, you can do that too. Normalize mistakes. So this is what practice is for. This is actually what games are for. And I repeat this to my players all the time. A game is a chance to take all the things you just learned in practice and to apply them, to try them out. It's okay if you mess up, right? You mess up, I'll pull you out. I'll explain how to tweak it, how to change it. We'll put you right back in, right? So help reframe mistakes as a chance to learn. So when I do that in the car, and I do preface this with don't make the car ride home from a game or a practice a forced conversation time. Maybe sit with your kid after practice for a couple minutes and just say, talk to them then. When they're in the car and they don't have a chance to escape, if they really don't want to talk about they feel trapped, and that's going to shut them down for future conversations. So, you can ask the beginning, hey, um, you know, you okay talking about practice for a few minutes? Or just ask them, like, how do you feel like the game went today? And asking them open-ended questions as opposed to saying, this is what I saw, or this is what I think you need to do, right? Uh, really, really hold yourself back from jumping in a teaching mode and just ask questions of them. Um, and if they seem tired or they're not really giving full answers, be like, hey, you don't really seem to be into the conversation. They just say, I'm really tired. They're like, okay, you know what? Can we talk about this later tonight or later this afternoon? And, just bring it back up later. Um, and so when you do eventually talk about it, you can say, hey, what did you do well today and what didn't you do well? If they bring up something they didn't do well, great. If they don't, you can say, well, may I bring up something I noticed that I think you can improve on? Usually they're going to be like, yeah, okay. They might not love it at first, but you just open it off. Remember, I asked permission to bring it up, right? That's giving them the opportunity to decide whether to listen to you or not. And sometimes kids don't want to listen to their parents. They might listen to their coach, but they don't want to listen. Okay, fine, right? Coaches can do this too, and you can always go to the coach and say, hey, I noticed my kid is doing this a lot. Um, I've noticed I can motivate my kid by doing X. And I will tell you, as a coach, I really do love getting that extra guidance of my kid responds really well to fill in the blank. That's been very helpful for me because then I can use that with them. So normalize mistakes. Talk about part of normalizing mistakes is to bring up your own mistakes, parents. We all make them. Talk about them. Be like, man, I really screwed up today. Or talk about a time when, you know, you did something and you felt like it was cost the team the game or something like that. Like bring all that stuff up. Or maybe it was something at work where you really screwed up and you're like, oh yeah, that forced us to have to work overtime for the next 2 weeks because of it. Or, who knows, whatever it is. Or remember the time when I did this and we spent the rest of the afternoon fixing it, right? Talk about times when you made mistakes, but then talk about what you did to learn from it. Like, what did you learn from that mistake? That will normalize mistakes. Laugh about them. When you fall down, laugh. It normalizes looking stupid, quote unquote. You can't see my air quotes, but I'm air quoting. Support routines. So this can be pre-game, this can be post-game, right? Making sure that every pregame, maybe you have like a playlist that you play, or you, you know, talk to them. Or I know one of the questions I asked my kids on the way to a game, what are you going to try and do well today during the game? Okay. Right. That's a ritual that we have. And it kind of gets them in that mindset. Teach positive self-talk, right? You might ask like, hey, I know you got really down after X happened, after, this kid got by you or whatever, or after you fell off the beam or you did this, whatever it is. You know, what were you telling yourself after that? Ask them, like, what was going on in your head? And some kids are really good at being up. Some kids might say, I don't know. But they say, I don't know. This is a chance for you to kind of give them some stuff to try out. You'd say, oh, well, you know what? When I'm really struggling or when I've made a mistake, I just take a deep breath and I go, next right thing. I got the next right thing. Or if someone gets by me or I lose the ball, I say, okay, I've got to hustle up and get back on defense so I can help my team get the ball back. Or, whatever it is, right? Teaching them positive self-talk, not like, oh my God, I'm so stupid. If they do say that and you catch them in that, be like, do you feel like that's helping? Just ask them that. 9 times out of 10, they're going to say no, unless they're really angry at you and they just want to throw it back in your face. You'd be like, yes, right? And you'd be like, really? So it doesn't seem like it's helping, right? So the things you can talk. So help positive talk, emulate this, right? Use positive self-talk with yourself. Um, and then the next thing is letting them lead. This goes back to the open-ended questions. What do you think you can try next? Or what do you think you can do to improve upon that, right? If they got beat, you can say like, well, what do you think would help with that? They might say, I don't know, because they don't know the game that well or the sport that well. Or, you can say, okay, well, or if it's a bullying situation, you can talk about like, what do you think you could do differently, right? Back to open-ended questions and helping them when they come up with the idea, they're much more likely to do it. So we already talked about this. Lessons in sports stay with kids for a lifetime, good and bad. I've had people in my office that have been bullied so badly by a parent or a coach that they never go back to sports, that they hate sports. Um, I have lots of other examples where people's best friends are from their sports teams for the rest of their lives. They're lifelong friends. Or I often talk about certain sports I played where they have been so instrumental in helping me get through difficult times because I can use the things that I did to improve in that sport to help me get through difficult times in life. Um, you know, let's use that power of sport wisely, intentionally. Kids can learn how to lose with grace, right? Be really respectful of someone else's talent and strength as opposed to seeing them as a threat. Right? You see that a lot in the corporate sector where someone is really good at something. Instead of teaming with them, people will automatically put a target on their back. And it's horrible. It creates toxic environments. I see it way too much. You know, I will say that people that played sports for a long time, I don't see them do that as much. They often will see the strengths and try and team up and try and partner. Um, you will see, kids learn how to be humble, right? Which is a really good quality in people where they are successful, but they don't brag about it. They make everyone feel included. They make other people feel like they were part of their success and can bring them into it. How great does that feel when someone's successful and they let you know that they feel like you helped them get there? How to be supportive, right? Eventually, if they ever become parents, they need to learn how to be supportive, how to recover from failure, right? Which means, there's no such thing as failure, it's just learning opportunities. And of course, helping them believe in themselves. So, what can you do now? Well, as parents, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present, right? In the now. So, using these 3 steps, you can help shape a safe and empowering experience in sport and beyond. First, you start with the conversation. Ask about team values. If you're a coach, set team values. Define what respect means. Uh, your family, which is inherently a team. Talk about your family values and what it means to respect each other. That's a really important one that's come up in my family where what we think of as being respectful means different things to different people. And it's really good to get on the same page with that. Stay engaged. You don't have to be engaged every second of every day. And staying engaged doesn't mean like hovering over your kid during a practice while the coach is trying to coach, or yelling to your kid during the game while the coach is trying to coach, or during a practice. That's not staying engaged. Okay. Staying engaged means being there, letting your kid know that you're there to support them, and monitoring the behaviors and checking in with them after practice. Before practice, if they seem out of it, right? If they seem out of it before, I'd be like, hey, you're not yourself. Are you okay? Right? And if they say they don't want to go to practice, walking them through the reasons why. I have had to do this with my own kids. And if they have a valid reason, right? Like they feel sick, like, oh, well, we don't want to get the rest of the team sick. Okay. And if they have like a fever, obviously I walk through what it means to be sick enough to not have to go to practice, right? We walk through all the kind of the steps to identify what's going on. Back to building mental strength. We went through some ways you can do that. It includes changing your language, right? Which means using observations, not labels, creating routines, allowing space for them to be autonomous, to be an individual, and that gives them a chance to grow, letting them fail, but then using that failure as a learning opportunity. They don't always love it. I have one kid that takes those conversations really well, and another one that is very sensitive to it. And I have to remind the sensitive one, like, hey, I'm not judging you right now. I'm just talking to you about something that I could tell you felt a little disappointed in. And so I want to know how I can help you learn from it, right? Sometimes I've been dead wrong. As I coach my kids, sometimes I'll take one out and be like, hey, you seem like you are dwelling on this or that. And I'll find out later it had nothing to do with that, right? I've done that a couple times. I've definitely owned that mistake and talked through it with my kids. Again, owning my mistake, accepting the mistake that I made, the quote unquote failure, and learning from it, and be like, you know what? I made an assumption, and I've learned that next time I just need to ask you what's going on first, right? So our influence as parents extends far beyond game day, as we've already talked about. Let's help our children and their teams thrive in what truly matters, right? What culture are we creating at the dinner table, on the sidelines? The sidelines mean the parent sideline, right? Are you yelling at the refs for a bad call, or yelling at your kid for doing something wrong? Or are you telling them to pick their teammates up? Are you telling them to encourage each other? Are you telling them to do the next right thing? Big difference there. And I can tell you as a coach that when I've seen kids that struggle in the sports field or really get upset in what we call like head cases, right? Sometimes I often can look on the parent sideline and I see that parent screaming at their kid during the game. And they think they're being supportive because they're giving their kid direction. And a couple times I've had to talk to the parents and be like, hey, you can coach your kid all you want once the game's over, but during the game, I'm the coach. And if you want to help coach, then come over here and we can talk about what that means to be a coach. But when you're on the parent sideline, you need to be a parent. When I'm just a parent and not a coach, I have asked coaches, what can I say that is supported that the kids understand from the parent sideline? And the coaches can give me very specific language, especially if it's in a sport I don't understand, like, saying certain things that the kids will understand that is part of the coaching philosophy, right? And the coach will really appreciate that. And they know that you're supportive of their coaching. What's your tone? How are you saying things? It's not just what you say, but also how you say it. We talk about that a lot in our family, where sometimes we have to take a breath and really adjust our tone, right? Tone in text messages. What are you texting or emailing? How are you saying it? How is it coming across? We lose a lot of what we're trying to say in text messages and emails because you can't see the body language. You can't hear the tone or the intonation. So we have to be really careful about how we say things in the digital world. Are we building athletes who win? Right? And that's all that matters? Or are we creating people who will lead with strength and kindness and purpose? I, for one, would much rather have the strength, kindness, and purpose. And when you see environments like that, the kids are having a lot more fun. And there are a lot more proud parent moments. I've seen it happen with kids when a kid will come up and they're upset, and I see another teammate go sit by them. And I'm getting teary just even thinking about this because I've seen it on my own teams where a kid will come up and put their arm around their teammate and be supportive, or, when they do something wrong in the sports field, maybe they've pushed someone over, they didn't mean to, they do lean down and say, "Are you okay?" and help them sit up, but not in a I have to say this kind of way, but really concerned. There's a difference. Are you teaching that with your kids? Are you teaching your kids after the team makes a mistake to say, "Hey, we've got this, like, go back to this," really making positive statements. So that's what we can teach our kids. So some resources where this comes from, I love truesport.org. They have tons and tons of articles on coaching, bullying, mental strength, skills, all, and they have more resources. Stopbullying.gov, if you ever feel like you need to learn more about it, or you feel like your children might be experiencing it, or you're seeing it, you can go to that website. They have tons of resources on there to help you work through it. The book that I've been used a lot for this day, Read Tonight Will Help You Win Tomorrow. It's a short book. It's an easy book to read. It is a great one that I recommended. I read it in less than 2 hours, and I'm not a speed reader. It's really, really easy read. I recommend it to pretty much everybody. We can get more technical books like Psychology and the Sports of Coaching, but all these things are helpful. Again, if you have any questions related to these types of things, please, please, please post them on our social media so that I can answer them. Please give us topics to talk about. Continue to watch these, continue to learn and improve. As a parent, I thank you for letting me research these topics because it helps me be a better parent uh, every day. And I will talk to you again soon. No parenting and mental health next week. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. I've not even talked about gratitude this week, but find something to be grateful for is another great way to help your kids lead with compassion. All right, have a good one and be well.